Alex Smith, former NFL quarterback. He's now an analyst
out right now,
for ESPN. LaVar, we mentioned in passing Robert Saleh a few minutes ago.
Yeah, we did.
And
great coach.
Well, this wasn't in passing. Alex Smith had some comments because the subject got brought up on Sirius XM radio talking about what's better for the development of a quarterback, an offensive-minded head coach or a defensive-minded head coach.
No.
And
well, I know where this is going.
He just talked about the mentality and all that and, just the differences between those two. And then he specifically pointed out the New York Jets situation. And I feel like we've heard this somewhere before, but he said, quote, according to Alex Smith, "Yeah, Robert Saleh, you're a great defensive mind and coordinator, but you have no idea how to develop a quarterback. The coordinator you hired never called plays, so that's a completely different animal. And as much as you think you're prepared to handle that development of a young kid, you're just not." End quote from Alex Smith. Shots fired from Alex Smith at Robert Saleh in discussing his handling of Zach Wilson as a New York Jets quarterback.
What's his agenda? Is there an agenda, Q?
I'm not quite sure.
Well,
I find it pretty interesting, and I'll go as far as saying this. Here's what happens when usually there's a defensive-minded head coach. When things aren't going well offensively,
run the ball.
No, QB's gone. QB's out. So for example, if you look at last year. Who got clipped in Arizona? Kyler Murray or Cliff Kingsbury?
Cliff.
Who got clipped in Denver? Nathaniel Hackett or Russell Wilson?
Hack.
Who got clipped in Indianapolis? Frank Reich or, I guess you could say
Frank Reich.
Matt Ryan, but, he's technically still is getting paid by the Colts.
Yeah, but they both got clipped, but Frank Reich got clipped first.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
And that's kind of the general point is, usually when you've got an offensive-minded head coach and things aren't going well with the offense, the person who's going to end up getting clipped is the head coach. And part of the reason for that is the head coach in that instance usually takes more ownership, takes more accountability, right? That's his background. That's what he's supposed to be good at. You hear it in press conferences. He's the one that understands the position and what comes along with it. And so usually he's defending that quarterback. Now, it's an entirely different scenario when you're talking about a head coach dealing with a quarterback. Now, there was some defensive-minded head coaches that got fired last year, Matt Rule in particular. But if you think about the past 3 years for Matt Rule, it was a revolving door of quarterbacks. There was really no one at all who was consistent, at least as a starting spot. And you could say whether it's on him or the situation, whatever the case is, but he constantly kept looking for another guy. When the Carolina Panthers started playing their best football under Steve Wilkes, Coach Wilkes actually just let Sam Darnold in there. And Sam Darnold actually played pretty well to finish the season. So my point is there's different perspectives when you're on one side of the ball, or that's what you know best, and that's why you got the head coaching job, when you then apply it to a quarterback. Because it's just an entirely different position when you're coming from it from a defensive perspective versus offensive. Because offensive-minded guys are like, we're the two guys who ultimately are going to be standing next to the dumpster together or hoisting up a Lombardi together. And those aren't my words. That came from Mike Holmgren one time when I had a sit-down conversation with him talking about the situation in Cleveland. And if you're a defensive-minded head coach, you don't look at you two as the same way. You got a partnership. And as soon as that head coach who's defensive-minded in nature doesn't believe you're holding up your end, and it's usually just bottom-line performance-based. It's not taking into account all the other things that are going on. The offensive line's banged up, starting receivers out, whatever the case is. Hey, I hired a guy who doesn't have any experience whatsoever calling plays, but, hey, he's here, so you got to deal with that. But as soon as he doesn't feel like that partnership is working out, he cuts ties. And that's, to me at least, the reason why I think a lot of quarterbacks, when they've got a defensive-minded head coach, it usually doesn't work out very well with them. Now, there's exceptions. Obviously, Tom Brady, Bill Belichick, right? But, eventually Tom got tired of that whole deal and moved on and won a Super Bowl in Tampa. And, what became public was a lot of his disgruntlement with how things operate, how things worked in New England. I guess maybe between him and Bill. And I'm sure they've made nice, but that's just the truth of the matter. There was, I'm sure, some times when he's like, dude, we're in this together. It's not like you as the head coach and me. Like, we are the two faces of this franchise. Like, we are the two people everyone points to for success or lack thereof. Like, we're tied to each other whether you like it or not. And I don't know that defensive-minded head coaches always see it that way.
Can you guys give me context of, is there any connecting points with Alex Smith and Robert Saleh? Were they both in San Fran together?
No,
at any point? So. Do they know each other?
No, I think he was just generally asked the question. But if you think about it this way, think about how Alex Smith left Washington back before it was the Commandos. And I think when he was there, when there was the football team, then the other name. When he got hurt and all that, like I think the way even Ron Rivera had handled some things with him, I don't think he appreciated. Like, that wasn't an amicable breakup.
And
that's interesting because
Joe Douglas, by the way, and sorry to interrupt, but the general manager of the Jets even said last weekend that he sort of lamented how they handled Zach Wilson, kind of what they could have done better, what they could have done.
Dude, I told you all last year.
Yeah.
That's what ticked me off the most about it is, like, Jets fans were trying to give me all this flack because I told you, I was like, yeah, it's gonna take a while if Zach Wilson's gonna become whatever he's gonna become, but I didn't really see it, and the first thing I said was once they benched him, I was like, this is the worst thing you can do. Like, you're gonna set your organization back if you don't find out what you have in this young man that you spent a number 2 overall pick on. Like, you got to let him play through it. You got to go through some adversity. I mean, look, as good as the roster is built around that team, there's some amazing young pieces. I mean, Quinn Williams and Sauce Gardner, all these guys. But it wasn't going to matter. They weren't going to go win a Super Bowl last year. And so instead of finding out what you had in Zach Wilson, you let Mike White go in and become a fan favorite who now plays for a divisional rival in Miami. You didn't even sign him back. And you kept back the guy who, I mean, it basically looked like he lost all confidence because of how they handled the situation when he finally did get, the chance to come back in and play. And now you've gone to Aaron Rodgers, and you're not going to see a Zach Wilson if everything goes well for the next 2-3 years.
And that's, to me, I think they did. I think Robert Saleh, to his defense, I think he saw everything he needed to see at that point.
But so let me go one step further. If he honestly understood, if they honestly understood in New York what's best for Zach Wilson, they would move on. They've got Tim Boyle there. He knows Aaron. He's got experience in the league. Like, he'll be a capable backup. They don't need Zach Wilson there. It's only going to stunt him and his growth more. People keep acting like, well, he's going to sit behind Aaron. No. That's not the intent of what Aaron's there for. And, yes, of course he'll learn things. Of course he'll pick some things up here and there. Quarterbacking is a developmental sport. You need experience. You got to play. And some guys have faster learning curves than others. Some guys can be Joe Burrow, where, it can take some time. He finally got a shot at LSU, and then he thrives. And then he gets into the NFL, and he thrives. Some guys can be that. But most of them don't have that. These teams don't give them the time to develop. Like a Josh Allen, it took 3 years before we really saw what he was capable of. And that's the thing is Zach Wilson now has been in the league long enough where he needs to go somewhere where he can maybe compete for a job and go play. I don't know if it's Atlanta. I don't know what other team you want to throw in there, but he needs to go to some place where he might have an opportunity to play and go get some reps and start to continue to develop and build his confidence back.
We wouldn't limit that to just defensive-minded coaches, right? I mean, to me, I think a lot of times the reason why guys don't get the type of time that you're speaking of is because of the pressure that's coming from probably the people that are paying those coaches. What's their job security look like? What's their situation, look like in that scenario? If they're not being looked at as, oh, we see you working to develop this talent and he needs to get his experience and get all those things that you're speaking of. If you're putting a time frame and the clock is ticking on me to get results before I lose my job, I mean, wouldn't you say that plays a part? I don't think that it would take total ignorance.
I just gave you a list of the offensive coaches that end up falling on the sword. Like, they understand there's a way of doing it, and they try to see it through, and they might even be the ones that get clipped if they don't get there in time. Right?
Yeah, I mean, but I think it does prove the point that if I don't get there in time, I am going to lose my job. So I'm going to pull them. I'm going to pull them, and I'm going to try to do something different.
But that's a defensive-minded head coach. Because, like a defensive-minded head coach isn't going to pull them, or is going to pull them when they feel like, oh, he's not there, or whatever the case may be. An offensive-minded head coach is like, we're going to see this through. Like Atlanta,
even
for
if
example,
that means me losing my job.
Yeah, I just gave you examples of that.
Right.
Like,
Right.
So look at Atlanta. Look at Atlanta with Desmond Ridder. Desmond Ritter's got a ton of experience playing college football. He showcased a lot of intangibles, a lot of skills that you're looking for out of, a starting quarterback. Will he be the quarterback they're hoping he will be? I don't know. Arthur Smith seems to think he'll be. I mean, as of right now, that's what they're gonna go with going into the season. And Arthur Smith could very well lose his job for it. But he's willing to risk that for it, right? Because if you stacked up the NFC South right now, and you looked through that division and said, whether it's Bryce Young, Derek Carr, Desmond Ridder, who am I missing right now in the NFC South, by the way?
Baker Mayfield, the Bake Show.
Baker Mayfield in Tampa. How does Desmond Ridder stack up to those guys?
It's not bad.
Well, I would say you wouldn't put him ahead of any of them. I mean, no. Baker Mayfield's got a playoff win, a ton of experience. Say what you want, but that's just the reality of it. Bryce Young was the number 1 overall pick, and you're looking at Derek Carr, who's literally passed for the last 5 years, 4,000 yards, and would have been last year if he not got benched.
I'm not blown away by any of them, so it's not bad.
That's fine, but I'm saying you get the general point.
I get it.
There's a chance if they don't win.
I get what you're saying.
Let's say they win 5 or 6 games. There's a chance he's not there next year.